Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this edition of the Q-Files. For the record, it's the 4th of September. The year is 2008. With me tonight is Tom Horn, and Tom and I are going to talk about the alien agenda. We're going to talk about Stargates, and we're going to talk about the demonic activity that's only going to increase. And I want to get right into the interview. We won't be taking any break. This will be a 1-hour condensed version, which is equal to 2 hours of regular timed version. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Steve. Good to be back on the radio with you again.
Well, thank you, and it's just my delight. You know, it's fascinating, Tom, because right now so much is happening. I want you to share, real briefly, if you would, what got you interested in the study of UFOs and aliens, because you were an ordained Assembly of God minister for a number of years, preaching and teaching, and where was the transition point?
Yeah, well, first of all, I asked the Lord to forgive me for that AG part, just so you know.
Yeah, no, I understand. But, I had to do that also.
Yeah, I know you did. I knew that from a long time ago. Well, of course, my interest in this, and I know we've only got an hour, so I'll try to move along quickly. It was personal, and also from a research point of view, personal as it relates, to my sister and niece, which we've talked about on your show before. But from a research point of view, my interest in this really kind of came in a roundabout path, because I had started studying some of these emerging fields of science that I talk about all the time now, like biotechnology, transgenics. And how that led me over into ufology was kind of extraordinary in that I didn't see, early on, maybe 14, 15 years ago, I didn't see anybody in the faith community actually talking about what some of the long-term aspects might be of these new sciences which portended to cross over the species barrier. And I was kind of curious as to why nobody in the faith community was writing about it or talking about it, what some of the ethics or philosophical questions might be as related to that science. And so I started doing some of the research on my own. I wrote a couple of editorials. One of those editorials got fairly wide distribution. I might have told you this before, that I was contacted by Cal Thomas out of the blue, syndicated columnist for the LA Times, and at that time he was a CNN co-host on Crossfire, and he was blown away by what I had written, and from his worldview, he thought that this was a sign that we were moving into the end times, that surely if men were going to begin using sciences now to blend animals with humans and the whole transhumanist argument, that this had to be a sign of the end times. And what I found startling about it was that, here's a guy who lives on the edge of the news, and yet he wasn't even familiar with what I was writing about back then. Of course, very few people were, but that struck me as so unusual that I, for various reasons I won't go into now, I took it upon myself an interest in studying this new field of transgenics, which, of course, today is even more sophisticated, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, all of these different emerging ologies, if you will, that have been warmly embraced by different people, including the transhumanist movement, as hopefully holding for them the holy grail to the next step in human evolution, so that we can all become gods. But what I had wanted to do, Steve, in researching these sciences, I wanted to find out what some of these researchers were saying, what they were postulating about either the potential good or bad, the pros and cons of what some of that science might unleash upon humanity in the future. And I was having a terrible time, and I kept doing this research stuff. The internet was just barely invented at the time. And I kept doing these searches, was going to the library, and I was trying to find stories, something that would tell me what might be the result of blending animals and humans. And I couldn't find anything in the science models, but I kept coming across this extraordinary story, supposedly mythology. But it was something that leapt off the pages of ancient history at me, that this had been done once before. There was actually a record. And the longer I looked at this record of these so-called gods, or if you want to call them angels or watchers or advanced scientists or whatever you want to call them, what they had done was identical to what we were doing now. And this struck me as extraordinary. And, of course, the moral story behind what had happened in ancient mythology was that it led to chaos. And I thought, there could be a record here already recorded in Earth's history that we've done this once before, or somebody done this once before, and the results were not positive. And of course, the old story was, these gods. They came down, they mingled their species with the human race, and for some reason, in order for them to extend themselves, now in the Bible, of course, talks about this in Genesis 6. It also refers to the Watchers in Daniel, other places. In the New Testament, I believe that Peter and Jude both are making direct quotes from the book of Enoch, who also told this story about these beings who came down. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about this a little bit later, but the first thing that struck me as odd was, why would these beings have needed to blend these various species in order to create a pathway, something where they could leave their estate, as Peter and Jude and Enoch say, and Genesis, and they found that women, and Enoch says, of course, they also used animals, and other books, by the way, I think you and I have talked about before, Jasher 4:18.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Yeah, various ancient texts which told this story about these beings using animals, plants. By the way, an interesting story last week out of Oxford University. Not Nick Bostrom, but another professor out of Oxford University talking about in the near future we might also be able to blend ourselves with plants in order to create our own photosynthesis and whatever. But that this had been done once before, and that it had brought upon earth judgment. Of course, the sacred books say the judgment of God. Now, how this brought me to ufology. I started looking at these ancient records, but surprisingly, my research into these stories of human and animal DNA harvesting took this turn when I started coming across a related phenomenon that was occurring now, a contemporary phenomenon called alien abduction. And I found that the best researchers into alien abduction were documenting something identical to what the ancients had done, the removal, the harvesting of human and animal DNA in these UFO flap areas, what Jacques Vallée, a secular researcher and one of the best, called the harvesting of vital energy, DNA associated with three-dimensional life forms, something that he thought, and many others have thought, was being required by whoever these beings were as a kind of construct material for achieving incarnation, or at least migration, if you will, from their dimension into ours. And so, Steve, whether I was looking at ancient history, comparative mythology, alien abduction, biblical text, sacred text, I kept finding this universal testimony that from the beginning of time, some type of unknown superpower had an interest in collecting and blending Earth's species, not just human, but animal. You go to bed one night, you wake up the next morning, Skippy the horse is laying out in the field, and parts of its anatomy have been removed with laser-like precision, harvested for some reason. And down through time, these takers of DNA were known as Zeus, Hades, Watchers, according to the book of Enoch, and Enoch, too, in the 7th chapter of the book of Enoch, talks about how this also included animals. So, first of all, how I got involved in this was starting out in the study of emerging fields of science, not being able to find models that might tell me the good or bad of where the blending of these species, transgenic creations that now we're creating all over the world, by the way, and not just the stories that people know about, where in the United Kingdom and in Australia, and also here in the United States in privately funded laboratories where we're creating mice with human brains and animal-human chimeras and all this stuff for research purposes, but also, Steve, as you know, offshore, Latin America, places like that. And this was confirmed to me by the insider that I have at the world's largest genetic modification company, which I won't name, who said that when I was talking about transgenic plant life and genetically modified crops, that in his opinion I was barking up the wrong tree, at least as it compared to the real genetic modification experiments that were going on, and he told me specifically, and of course this is privately being funded, secretly being funded, U.S. tax dollars. Isn't that astonishing?
Yep.
Going through black op budgets, through safe op budgets, to fund some of this research that's being done not in this country but in other countries, maybe in this country too, but specifically his reference to another place in Latin America a military contracted situation, and he said specifically, and keep in mind this guy owns